on a different device this time. Let's see what happens on this device. Okay, so we left off on the 14th page of the Mimer on page Yud Ches, second paragraph on the page, line 20. And we were asking about the question, how come when it comes to the Yom Tovim, do we find that the Aliyah L'Regel is limited just to Yom Tov and not on Shabbos, and only when Mashiach comes, it's going to be on Shabbos. Seemingly, Shabbos it's holier than Yom Tov. If any time we should have the Aliyah L'Regel, it should be on Shabbos. And at the end, in the times of the first and second base of Mikdash, Aliyah L'Regel is during Yom Tov. So the answer was that even though Shabbos is higher than Yom Tov, but the revelation does not come down. The Yom Tov, the revelation comes down. So therefore, in the times of the first and second base of Mikdash, we weren't able to have the level of lirois, lishtachvois to see, and the bittul to have it on every Shabbos. That was not possible. But now, in the times of not now, but when Mashiach comes, everything is going to be able to be revealed down below. So even the Shabbos level, that's the level of Pnimius Atik, will be able to come down below as well. And since it's able to come down below, we'll be able to have the Aliyah and L'Regel every Shabbos, not just on Yom Tov. We'll be able to have that level of seeing godliness, and we'll have the get of Pnimius Atik and so on. Okay, that was all about Shabbos. But in the Haftarah it says also about Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, Rosh Chodesh must be something unique as well. That again is something unique, but it's not able to be done on during the times of first and second base and Mikdash. Only in the times of Mashiach can the advantage and quality of Rosh Chodesh be revealed, and that's why Aliyah L'Regel will be on Rosh Chodesh. So now he's going to explain the idea of Rosh Chodesh. Again, line 20, page Yud Ches. My Cain, similar vein will be the L'Regel every Rosh Chodesh. In Yadu, it's known the Rosh Chodesh Ein Nikra Yom HaMais. Rosh Chodesh is not considered a day of action, a day of normal, regular work. It's a celebratory day, as we'll explain. Moshe Namar, like it says in the Vuas Yecheskel, also describes the future base of Mikdash. It says, Shar HaChotzer HaPnimius HaPoine Kodem, the inner courtyard gate that face east, Yeh Sagur Sheshes Yemei HaMaisa, will be closed for the 6 days of action, or the 6 days of work. Ubiyom HaShabbos Yipaseach, that gate that normally during the week is closed will be opened on Shabbos. Ubiyom HaChodesh Yipaseach, and the day of the month, meaning Rosh Chodesh, it'll also be opened up. So what do you see from that? When it says 6 days of the week, it'll be closed. But how does he call it? He calls it Sheshes Yemei HaMaisa, 6 days of work. So during the work days, it's closed. During the action days, the Maisa days, it's closed. And on Shabbos, when it's Chodesh, it's open. So that tells you that not only Shabbos is not considered a part of Yemei HaMaisa, but also Rosh Chodesh is not considered part of Yemei HaMaisa. So it says, that the day of Shabbos and the day of the Rosh Chodesh is not part of the days of action. As opposed to Yom Tov is part of the days of action. How is that so? It's very strange. Rosh Chodesh not, and Yom Tov yes. Yom Tov muter b'mlechas echel nefesh. Yom Tov is permitted to do work that's necessary for preparing food. Like it's explained, like it's explicit in Torah Shebeksav, that you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov as opposed to Shabbos. For Barucha, but Torah Shebeksav explained at length in Teresh Bapa and Allah and Gemara and so on. And therefore, because you could do certain types of labor on Yom Tov, so therefore it's considered still part of Yimei HaMaisa. But then the question is, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh is for sure allowed to prepare Eichel Nefesh. It says in the last line of this page, Akadain in movement still it's not understood. Aloi Rosh Chodesh, Mutter, top of page test, Loi Dakim Lach Eichel Nefesh. Rosh Chodesh is Mutter not just in the work in preparing food, but Yom Tov like Yom Tov Elgam Kolam Malachis. Essentially, all work is permitted on Rosh Chodesh. There are certain things that women took upon themselves, a minig, not to do, but it's not that there's any Torah prohibition like there is on Yom Tov or Shabbos. So how is it possible to say, despite the fact that on Rosh Chodesh we can do all types of work, any type of work, still in all, it's still in all not included in the term that he calls Yimei HaMaisa. So to be able to explain it, we have to leave the term Yimei HaMaisa in the literal sense of doing work, and we have to transcend that explanation and go to the pnimius understanding, to the understanding of Pichsidis, of the different types of amshachas that take place on these different days. So let's see how he explains it inside. Line 4. That explanation, this is the Hinei B'Tzibur Yeshtei Madregas. In speech, there are two levels. There is speech the way it receives from the midas. In the Oilmas Al Yoinim, the midas is the level of the emotional attributes, is the level of Zeir Ampin, small faces, in other words, the level that's still mitzumtzum and constricted and not fully revealed. And then there's a higher level of speech the way it receives from the level of intellect. Like, for example, by a person down here below, when a person over here below speaks words of love. So where is the speech receiving its life and vitality from? Where is it receiving this emotion that is being communicated? Then the speech is on the receiving end of the emotion. The emotions that he has about love, and he loves a certain person, and then he shares that love by talking and telling that person how much they love him. So then the speech receives from the emotion. I know this means as follows. Where did that love come from? Midas, especially by a mature person, has an intellectual basis. Comes from his meditation. Like the Rambam wrote, what's the path to loving him and being in awe of him? Seemingly it's an emotion I'm not in control of. Comes the Rambam and says, the underlying theme of Chassidus Chabad is when a person thinks into the actions of Hashem, so then he comes to love him. So we see this idea that intellect is the trigger and is the cause for the emotion. Yet, the speech that is speaking and relating and communicating the emotions, even though the emotions came from intellect, but it's not relating to the level of the intellect. The speech is not received directly from the intellect. But when he speaks words of intellect, in other words, instead of sharing words of love, I'm sharing an idea. I'm speaking a thought, a concept, an idea, not just a thought, but an idea. So then, then speech receives directly from the brain, from the intellect. This means the speech is in its place. It's still the level of speech. But there's a level of speech the way it's still part of the person's intellect, like we've had not too long ago in Tanya, that he speaks about the whole idea about how the letters of speech is included in thought, and the letters of thought are included in the emotions are included in the intellect, and so on. So there's speech the way it's part of intellect. That's not the level of speech we're talking about here. When a person is actually using speech to communicate intellect, it's speech. It's in the world of speech. But it is receiving and getting from the intellect. What's visible externally to another. It's only the level of speech which comes about through letters and through language. What's the visible thing? When speech is part of intellect, so then the main thing that's seen and expressed is intellect, but somewhere in that intellect is hidden letters. Here it's not that way. What's the first thing that happens when I'm sharing an idea with someone else? I'm hearing that person is hearing my words. But in the words, but the ideas are, and the intellect is shining in the words. So he says, like the statement of the Pasuk, that the Torah is life for those that find it. Do not read it to the ones that find them, but to those that express it in their mouth. So even though that for the Torah to really vitalize the person and to energize the person, it's not just enough to think about it in the brain or to read it with your eyes, but you need to actually verbalize it and articulate it. But despite the importance of articulation and verbalizing Torah, the main thing is over here the idea that's being articulated through language. The intellect is like overpowering and an ascendancy over the letters. Indian is Gabrus Oiris al Kalim. That's the overcoming of the lights over the vessel. That's also the difference between Rosh Chodesh and the days of action that we said before, that Rosh Chodesh is not part of the days of action. Should be Mehamaisa, Mekabel, Hadibur, and Prinas Hamid. In the days of action, the level of speech of above, Hashem's divine speech, which animates and creates everything in this world, and is the energy for everything in this world. So in the days of action, the speech receives from the level of emotions. As opposed to Rish Chodesh, speech receives from the level of Chochmah. And now we can understand how, despite the fact that you're allowed to do work, it's still not considered to be Me'amais. Line 26. That's the reason. Though it's permitted to do work on Rish Chodesh, still in all, Mikol Mokim Einoi Nichlo Me'amais. Rish Chodesh is not included in days of action. Because then speech is receiving from the level of Chachma, which Chachma transcends the levels of the world and the level of action. It actually relates very well to the idea that we said about Shabbos. And we're going to contrast, and we say it's even better than Shabbos in a moment. But we said the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, we spoke about before, is Yom Tov, which is Mikroi Kodesh. It's only something that's all from holiness. It's the level of Bina. That's why it's the level of Simcha, it's the joy. Whereas Shabbos is Moichin the Abba, it's the level of Chachma. And we know Shabbos is not part of the days of action. In a similar vein, on Rish Chodesh, the level of Hashem's divine speech that gives energy to the world receives its highest from the level of Chachma, just like when our speech is connected to our Chachma instead of being connected to our Midas. Now the Rebbe goes on and says, line 28, that really there's something even more so about Rish Chodesh than Shabbos. And in this regard, that the revelation of Chochmah comes down in the letters, like we said before, that even though when I'm speaking words of Chochmah, there's actual language and letters, it's not concealed in the Seichel, but the Chochmah and the Seichel overpowers the words. What am I listening to? I'm not listening to words, I'm listening to an idea. It's the overpowering of Oiris over Caleb. So yes, Maila, but Rosh Chodesh, I feel like Abba Shabbos, there's an advantage in Rosh Chodesh, even over Shabbos. Shabbos meir agilu b'chinas hachachma atzma, because on Shabbos, what shines is only the level of chachma itself. Mashenkim b'Rosh Chodesh, as opposed to Rosh Chodesh, b'chinas hachachma meir ba'oisius, the level of chachma, top of page chav, shines in the oisius themselves. It's higher than the level of Chochmah itself. Because how can something that's a level of Chochmah come down and mesh and coalesce with Oisius? For something that's higher than Chochmah to be able to come to the world of Oisius, you need to have something higher. That is what comes down from the source of Chochmah, and the source of Chochmah is the Chochmah mind to Matzah. Chochmah comes from the level of Ayin, the B'chinas Keser, from the level of Keser. This is something that many Mamorim speak about, that the reason why a person gains so much when he explains something, that and he comes up with new ideas and new thoughts and so on and so forth, when he actually verbalizes the Chachma and talks to someone else about the Chachma, to such a degree that we say, Mitalmida Yoser Mikulam, that as much as I received from my teachers and as much as I received from my colleagues, from my students, I received even more, because since you are verbalizing it, you need to express the Chachma in letters. So therefore, you get a deeper insight. Why is that so? So Chassidus explains, because the level of speech has a higher source than the Chachma itself. So when you bring the Chachma down at the speech, you are tapping in to something higher than Chachma, and therefore you're coming into new insights in Chachma you wouldn't have had before. So that's the Maila of Rosh Chodesh over Shabbos. Shabbos, you only have Chachma. You don't have Chachma coming down at the speech. On Rosh Chodesh, in the speech, you're receiving from Chachma, so you have the Maila of higher than Chachma as well. So therefore, Rosh Chodesh has even an advantage over Shabbos. And therefore, it says that it's the gate that's of the courtyard, the gate facing east. Line 4 on page Chav. That's what it says. Appointed called him the one that faces east. The Kedem, who in Kesser, the level of east is the level of Kesser. Shalomaylam Chinas Chachma, that's higher than Chachma. Shnikras Reishis, that's called Reishis. Shemeir b'Shabbos, that shines on Shabbos. Chachma is called Reishis. As we know, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. So we know Chachma is identified with Reishis, the beginning. Kedem, in addition to being the word for east, it also means before and early, prior to. In other words, prior to Seder Ishtalshus, that's a level of Kesser. So if we need to have the level of Shar Apoina Kodim, when do we really tap into the level of the east, of the Kesser? That's specifically on Rosh Chodesh. That's why on Rosh Chodesh it opens up. On Shabbos also, but even more so, on Rosh Chodesh has even a greater connection with the level of Kesser, because it's the Seichel coming down to speech. The revelation of this level will be in the future when Mashiach comes. Whether it is now during Rosh Chodesh, we don't have that revelation. Just like we said about Shabbos, Shabbos' revelation is too high to be able to be revealed in an open way now, and only when Mashiach comes do we have that revelation. The same thing, Rosh Chodesh is only its revelation that's from that very high level is going to come down when Mashiach comes. Therefore, then will be the ascent in the time of the Beis Hamikdash in every Shabbos and every Rosh Chodesh. excuse me, line 9, page 12. The revelation of this level that will become revealed when Mashiach comes. Told him, action was dependent on our actions and our service now. This is going back to our parsha that says, Kisikna Evid Ivri Sheishonim Yavik. You will acquire a Hebrew servant. He will work for 6 years. What's the significance of working 6 years? The number 6 represents the 6 days of the week. The koyal avoida b'sheis me'achol refers to the avoidam in the 6 days of the week. Ubechlalos in a more broader sense, in a more broader look. B'sheis alpashin in the hava alma, the 6,000 years of the world's existence. It has to be in a way of a service of a servant. What's the idea of the service of a servant? The opposite of the nature of what one's habit is. For Tanya, like to explain in Tanya, someone who serves Hashem, someone that changes his nature and his habit. That's why he says, that it brings the Gemara that someone that studies 100 times something is not called an Ovid Olakim, and only someone that studies and reviews something 101 times, he's called an Ovid Olakim, because in those days the custom was to review something 100 times, and therefore he didn't go against his habit and nature. So an Ovid Olakim is someone that goes beyond his nature. In a way that he has to coerce himself. That's the idea of a servant. A servant doesn't do what he enjoys necessarily. This is also related to what the Rebbe always says, the term brought from Tanya, our actions and our service. So Ma'aseinu could mean more than just actions, but it could also hint at the idea of coercing oneself. Again, in the theme of being an Eved. Like it's brought down that the Gaboy tzedakah could coerce a person to give tzedakah. So we see the word ma'asin from the word ma'isa can also mean coercion. So when we speak about ma'aseinu or the seinu b'meshech shis al pishnin dehava alma, we're talking about the level of coercing and forcing ourselves to do things even beyond our nature. That's the idea of coercion. Like it explains in the Mamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe, who's the yard site, was a huge shvat. In other words, the idea of iskafia, that one has to bend themselves and so on. For us, and then when we do this, and when we attain the level of Mashiach's times, the idea of joy will be in its perfect state. That Yisrael will rejoice in his maker, as and Hashem will rejoice in his things that he made. So he says an interesting idea of you. It doesn't say that Hashem is happy or the Yidden are happy. Yismach is future tense. When you have the Yud beforehand, that's one of the letters that indicate future tense. Shalosh and us in the future tense should say, that this joy that Yidden will have in Hashem and Hashem will have in the Yidden will be in the future. The word Yismach is the same letters like the word Mashiach, because Mashiach's times there will be the idea of joy. Like it says, you are my son. I birthed you today. The Koyal Mashiach. It's referring to Mashiach that he's. Gemara says it's talking about that pasuk is referring to Mashiach. So on the one hand, I'm sorry, I skipped the line. Back to line 25. Sorry about that. The Mashiach Yeshnei in Yonim. In Mashiach, there's two components. Bechinas Ben. We spoke about before that there's a level of the Ben and the Eved. The Ben is the level of Atzilus. The Eved is the level in Bia, or especially the way Yidden are in this world. But it reaches even higher. then the level of Ben. And Mashiach, there's both aspects. Ben, how do we see that he's called a Ben? Like it says, you are my son, I birthed you today. The Koyal Mashiach, that pasuk, the Chazal say, is referring to Mashiach. And also, we know Mashiach is called Avad, Ubchinas Avad. He has the level of being a servant, like it says, behold, my servant, going Mashiach, will be very successful, exalted, and high, and very, very high. The main quality of Mashiach is the level of his being a servant. That's why all these titles, it says about him being the servant, not about him being the son. Only because the level of my servant, he'll be very great. The letters, me'oid, is the same letters of the word Adam. The fact that you're flipping around the combination and you're not reading it as Adam, you're reading it as Ma'oid, that shows that very much so, that shows that's even higher than Adam Addition. It's going beyond the level of Adam Addition, because it says Mashiach will be even higher than Adam Addition. Now, Yismach Yisrael B'Yis, so this is also what it says, that Yisrael will rejoice in his makers. Why is it saying his makers, Lashon Rabim? There's only one God. What's it mean, his makers? For Betanya, like it's explained in Tanya, the Koya, Allah Voidam, well, Hazagash, Mishanikr, Saram, with the is referring to the service and the work in this physical world. And this physical world is a world of multiplicity. It's a public domain, and it has the mountains of separation. And when a person takes the maker's like, and they takes the Chayes Alaki, it's like scattered, and like in all these different parts, like days of Poland, we affect that Hashem should rejoice in his makings, in his doings, with Bias Mashiach Tzidkeinu, and the coming Mashiach Tzidkeinu, Shikavet Tzidkei Yisrael, he will collect the scattered Yidden, Sha'azarez and Mashiach Vade. Once we see that he completes all of his jobs, including gathering in all the scattered Yidden, because of Mamish, then we know he's definitely Mashiach. Because of Mamish, speedily Ubagol the Da'an.